Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blueprint's New Rules podcast. Why new rules? Well, obviously, we're going through the coronavirus era now, the isolation era, and everything has changed. What will stick, what will not, we don't know, but definitely there are going to be new rules going forward, and that's what we're going to discuss in this podcast today. I'm Ian Shamandi.
Hi, I'm Ken Aber.
And we are the Blueprint Boys, or the 7 words or less guys from Blueprint Business Architecture. And we are introducing new rules as a new service so that we help companies define their new rules. What is going to drive them to change in the future? So what you're going to see in this podcast is you're going to see some examples of the psychological, sociological, and business issues that we go into and how we go into them to try and figure out what your new rules are. Ken, so we just touched on new rules, but why do we really need to go through this exercise? Why do companies need to contemplate new rules as they go forward?
Well, I think there's going to be a big shift. At the end of the day, companies can try to go back to where they were, but their customers have changed. Because their customers have changed, there has to be new rules going forward.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. It's like customers, we the people, have gone through like 10 years of social evolution in this tightly compacted time frame of 4 weeks. And we're experiencing things. We're being forced to experience things in a way that we have not had to experience them before. And through the experience of those things, like working at home, for instance, we find, hey, this isn't so bad. It's great not having to fight rush hour traffic every day, to commute every day. And so I know I have to come into the office sometimes, but do I have to come into the office all the time? And if everybody in the office is thinking the same way, company's going to have to change.
Absolutely. And everything's being delivered to my home. I can order online pretty much everything I want, and food and supplies are all being delivered to my home. And that changes me having to go to a retail store now to pick things out.
Well, okay, but hold on a sec here, because companies there were always delivery services, at least for the last 5 years or so. There's always been, the Foodoras and that kind of thing. And there has always been the opportunity to work from home and to use these compensatory tools such as Zoom as secondary things. So we had those before, but what's happened that...
So Ian, I'd love to introduce you the concept of there was primary and secondary. We had things that we had primary ways to do things. We went to the office and we had a meeting. And that's basically how we would meet people. We would be a sales agent. We'd go out and meet our customers. That was the only way things could happen. We would travel to our customer, or they would travel to us, but we would meet in the destination. And Zoom calls were always the second and third and fourth option inside a whole bunch of options that we can do. Now Zoom has become a primary resource of how we're communicating and staying connected with people. And I think people are getting used to the fact now that Zoom is a way of how to communicate. So that becomes a primary option as opposed to a secondary or third option.
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction. So it's an interesting lens through which to look at this conversation and the new rules. This is one of the ways the new rules have changed things, is that things that were secondary options in the past, as you said, have now become primary. And we're gonna use that lens in our conversation today. But it's interesting, yeah. So what's the dynamic that causes them to shift from secondary to primary? And I think what that is just the experience of using them in a completely different context. So, who thought to have family meetings on a video conferencing tool? I'm sure there were people doing it, but I never heard about people doing it. It was a small subculture. And now people are forced to have these meetings because they can't get together, and they're finding, hey, I used to meet with my university friends once every 10 years, and I talked to them a couple of times a year on the phone. I can meet with them once a month or once a week or whatever. All of a sudden, I become much closer to them. So the experience of it changes our context. I think also it's the same in the workplace, that as we discover what it's like to really use Zoom, to be forced to use Zoom under all these different circumstances, and to learn new features of it so that you're able to do more things, private chat rooms, that sort of thing. The experience of it, you go, hey, this is pretty good, and something shifts from a secondary to a primary.
And I think things like the entertainment industry, the sports industry are really going to change over time. Again, I think we'll get back to sports and sporting events, but things like movies and theaters, how comfortable are you going back into a black box where you are very close to other people and sitting side by side? And I think, that's one translation. And then there's the whole restaurant industry. How comfortable are you going when we go back to having someone sitting right next to you, eating beside you? So I think family style restaurants are really going to struggle with space and how to serve people in the future.
Well, I think what you've done is you just introduced another lens through which to look at new rules, and not surprisingly, that's hygiene, right? Holy cow. I mean, your mother always told you, wash your hands, wash your hands. We've been hearing from doctors for years, wash your hands to avoid the flu. And we just sort of, did whatever we did or didn't do whatever we didn't do. Now, holy cow, has hygiene ever come to the forefront? And I don't think that's going away for a long, long time. I think that's a generational thing. Everybody who's living through this is going to feel this for their entire life. And, things like at a restaurant, you were talking about a restaurant, right? How many restaurants do you eat at that have subpar washrooms? Are you going to eat at those places anymore? And when you go into a business, that office better be immaculate. There better be hand gels all over the place. There better be, all these different things. Hygiene is going to become a part of your brand. And I think when you talked about the cinemas, you were talking about, oh my God, it's a negative part of their brand, whereas other companies, it would be a positive. But yeah, how are cinemas, how are restaurants going to overcome this hygiene phobia that we are all going to be developing?
Correct. And you'll judge a restaurant by its washroom before you even judge it by its food.
That's a bizarre shift, but yeah, absolutely. You used to just sort of hold your nose when you're going into the restaurant, and you prayed that the washroom was not indicative of what the kitchen was like. I think people are going to go, yeah, I'm not sure that I want to eat there anymore.
Right.
Ken, let's go a little deeper on some of these things. Let's start out with, well, why don't you tell the story about your friend and what he is discovering about his commute?
So my friend had an hour and a half commute every day to his office. And it was mandatory that he be in the office. And just again, talk about this primary, secondary thing. It was primary that you were in the office to be able to meet and be able to collaborate with your fellow coworkers. Well, with all that's gone on, he's now doesn't have that hour and a half commute, and he's saving 3 hours a day. And you know what? He's basically going, this isn't so bad.
Who wouldn't say that? Who wouldn't say that?
What I'll share with you is they're in an industry that is really important and is a key service, and they're still rocking and rolling and still producing product, and they're working from home and making it work. And so when there had to be meetings in the office, they're just using Zoom and other conference call means, and it's making it all work. And what's interesting about this whole conversation, I think, the at-home, box stores that service, like Staples that service, is going to do really, really well in this next future, because I think people are working from home and they need to build the supplies. That then leads to a bunch of conversations of how much is an employer going to compensate for their at-home use? What are they going to pay for? What are they not going to pay for? But I think as going forward, employers are going to have to consider this conversation about people working 3 or 4 days a week, and compromising be able to have the fact of people doing a makeshift.
Well, I think the home up until now, has always been, I mean, it's always been an extension. You always took work home and you did work at home. But there was always a nudge, nudge, wink, wink relationship. The IT people, especially the people in the security department, sort of had to say, okay, we'll hold our nose and you can use your computer on your unsecure Wi-Fi and blah, blah, blah. And they just like, it was just, I'm just going to shut my eyes and hope nothing happens with this. But when you look at your friend, his company, everybody was required to be in the office. That was the old style corporate culture. If everybody in his office is now clamoring for this work at home, the company is going to have to change. But with all that much greater working at home, the home really does become a formal extension of the office. And now all of a sudden, things like, well, like you said, the expense of who's going to set up that home office. Does the employee pay for that, or does the company pay for that? Who manages the security? Because now you've got a lot of flow of data between a presumably secure company and a totally unsecure home. So there's big issues to deal with there. But there's also, in the real estate market, if you're a commercial developer or a landowner, or if you're a residential developer or landowner, there's huge issues there as well.
I think for the next period of time, undefinable in the length, but I think things like board meetings and large boardroom meetings, those are a thing of the past. Most people are now going to attend and not travel and not come into the office, quote unquote, as much. And why do you need that great big boardroom now when you're doing this all virtually? So I think the usage of the space inside an office is dramatically going to shift.
Well, to that point, you've got your main boardroom. That's a lot of real estate that you're paying for, and the big boardroom, usually in a business doesn't get used as often as the other ones, but you're paying for that real estate 24/7, 365 days a year. If you're now, A, because people are working from home, and B, because people are going to have this hygiene hangover, and meeting in person in small boardrooms is not going to be something that's comfortable to a lot of people. So if you have a diminished need for boardrooms, why pay for that real estate? So if you're like a big law firm and you got 5 floors in the building, maybe you now only need 4. And maybe the way the landlord needs to compensate for that, losing that 5th floor, is to transform it into a common space with boardrooms and kitchens and meeting areas and all that sort of thing. And a whole bunch of floors in the building share that one common space meeting room area and book meetings on an as-needed basis. Maybe that's one of the adaptations that landlords are going to need to do.
And again, you can see it in the real estate market. And prior to all this, we always talked about 1 or 2 bedrooms plus den. Well, you've already seen people are shifting to 2 bedroom plus office. And it's interesting just that language. And again, that secondary versus primary conversation really comes in, because I need as a primary need, I now need an office to work from home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Condos will be much more attractive if it sounds like they've got an office. And especially if condo developers start not just calling that room an office, but actually build it out with the kind of amenities that you need in an office, like, the appropriate plugs, the appropriate power, that sort of thing.
Again, Ian, as an option, what could probably happen is that boardroom, which has now been sitting empty, will become part of the cube farm, because people don't want to be as close as they used to be, and there is a need for social distancing. I think it's very interesting. In the 60s to 90s, we built offices with our own door and our own space. And starting in the 2000s, we started tearing down the walls to opening it up. I predict that in the future, you can see us going back to having private offices again.
Sure, a cube farm is just like it's a huge pool of shared germs. Who's going to want to do that? So, and one thing I have noticed, by the way, is that in this brief time in isolation, companies have made very rapid changes. I mean, you hear about companies that make apparel, and now they're consumer apparel, and they're now making they're now making hospital gowns and masks and that sort of thing. So So no question, companies can turn on a dime like we're suggesting that they're going to have to in this new rules era. So Ken, since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, one of the constants has been the salesperson who goes out to meet the client. Through all the evolutions of business, through the decades and the centuries, the salesman who goes to meet the client face to face has been a constant, has been a survivor. Is that going to change?
I think that shifts completely. At the end of the day, that first golden handshake or that first uh, introduction to a person just can't happen that way anymore. We're going to do things much more virtually and in a communication like we're doing now on Zoom. And that really does shift things. And again, this is a great conversation of this primary, secondary. You know, if I would tell my boss, I'm going to send an email to introduce the company, it would have been okay, but a face-to-face meeting is what you would have been asking for in that letter. And a face-to-face meeting is what you would do, that you'd want to meet and discuss. Not saying that face-to-face meetings are going to go away, absolutely not. But what I am saying is people are going to have to figure out a different way to connect, and that people are going to accept it. And where the big shift is the client used to want you to come to their office and meet and somehow
Yeah,
create
they wanted a personal connection as much as you did.
connection. Nowadays, not so much. If I can work from home and stay from home, I don't want people coming to my home. I'm much more private now. I want to protect the hygiene of conversation. And so it really is going to change what the rules are of how you create a relationship. Now, I still believe you're going to have to create a relationship, and it's just going to be clever and innovative ways of figuring out how to build that relationship.
Well, I think it's the whole primary and secondary thing again, right? Like it was just assumed as a salesperson, you know, out in the road, you've got a territory, you've got your, you know, you've got your clients who you're responsible for, and it was assumed that you wanted to meet face to face, they want to meet face to face, and it's the best way to secure a close. And because we're now, you know, it's one of these situations where we're being forced into a new reality. And we discover that some of the things in that new reality are not so bad. So there's always going to be the big meetings, the important meetings that you're going to want to do face to face. And you said that was what you said, and what you also said is this idea that if it's not one of the big important meetings, is it necessary to actually travel to that person? Is it necessary to travel to that person because you visit them once a month by hook or by crook? And it's just sort of automatic behavior. Well, the customer is going to want you there for important stuff, but they're not going to want you there for unimportant stuff. So to quickly zip it off over a video conferencing medium like Zoom or GoToMeeting is much better for them. So again, it's this idea, face-to-face meetings are still going to be a primary, but the idea of doing regular meetings that used to be face-to-face that are less important on Zoom, that Zoom is a secondary getting promoted to a primary.
You know, again, as a complete optimist, as time is going on, a sales rep can cover many more clients now and much more territories, and now can begin to think global in this new world. You know, there used to be a conversation, how can I go over to UK and, I can't do a meeting until I meet them, and all of that conversation. We're now going to be able to become much more global. And I think it will also shift to a manager. The responsibility of supervising their employees becomes even more difficult because now they will have larger territories and be able to actually produce more in a way because they're half the time used to be on the road and traveling. And if you cut that out, they are actually should be able to produce more calls, larger territories, and look at a more global perspective.
Yeah, I think, if your territory is Canada and you're servicing it now, you're working full time and you're servicing it adequately, your company's very happy with what you're doing. But now all of a sudden, you're not on a plane every day anymore. you're on a plane once every couple of weeks. And the rest of the time, you're meeting with your clients like this. Well, it's way more efficient. All the time you're driving, all the time you're flying. That's wasted time. You're getting paid for wasted time. Now you can work. So if you're the rep for Canada and you're doing half as much as you did before, accomplishing as much, but in half the time, you're going to start to get antsy and you're going to want to expand. So yeah, I get your point about globalization, about how letting sales reps, or that sales reps are going to push their company to expand their territories because they're able to deal with them more efficiently. Well, we hope you've enjoyed our first episode of Blueprint's New Rules podcast. We're going to be talking about with other people. We're going to be bringing in experts from different sectors, and we're going to be talking to them about what the new rules are in their sectors. That's what's going to happen in future examples of this. Also, every company is going to be changed by this isolation, by the coronavirus. Everyone's going to change, as Ken mentioned up top, because your customers are changing. You're going to have to change. The sooner you figure out what the new rules are for your business, not even for your category, right? Because all your competitors, their new rules are going to be different because they're different companies than you. So what we are going to help you do with our new rules service is we're going to help you to find what are the new rules in your category or for your business, and then what you have to do and how you have to shift in order to accommodate those new rules. And those will be that will be the kind of thing that would be disseminated to everybody in the company so that they totally understand how the world has changed and how your company and they as employees of yours fit into your job. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Ian Shamandi.
And I'm Ken Aber.
And we are the Blueprint Boys of Blueprint Business Architecture. And if you have any suggestions for us about topics you'd like to hear, people you'd like to have us on, sectors you'd like us to cover, even what the format of the podcast is, we're all ears. Please send us a note at the email below. We'd love to hear back from you. And we'd love to include your comments or your input in future podcasts. Thank you very much and goodbye.